And we have some new faces and some old ones too. Dr. Lungren, did you have a haircut?
I finally got it cut. Yes, you,
Okay.
you are correct.
Okay, good. So we have amazing guests today on our happy hour. I think we are actually beyond the 1 year anniversary for this, but so much, gain, so many losses over the last year. We all remember March around this time is when a lot of us, their lives were changing. And, what a fantastic journey overall, looking on the other end or close to the other end. So today we're going to focus on Pharma AI. And as usual, please send your questions to the chat on YouTube. Else I will get to ask all my questions, so which is also okay. So we are going to begin with an introduction of our guests. I'm going from who appears on my left to clockwise. And so Andrea, do you want to tell us who you are, where you work, and what you're excited about today?
Yeah, I'm Andrea de Souza. I work at Eli Lilly and Company. I'm actually in Indiana right now. So it truly is happy hour time here. And I lead the enterprise high performance computing, data sciences, data engineering, AI/ML platforms team, and translational science informatics teams for Eli Lilly. Worked in the field for a really long time. I love working at the intersection of science, technology, and computers. And before this, I used to work at NVIDIA and the Broad Institute of Harvard and MIT and Amgen. I'm originally from Silicon Valley, so I'm really, really envious of all of you that are out there back at Stanford.
Awesome. Welcome. Next is Maureen.
Hi there. My name is Maureen Hillenmeyer. I'm a founder and the CEO of Hexagon Bio. We're in Menlo Park, California, just down the street from Stanford. I did my PhD in biomedical informatics at Stanford and launched Hexagon after that. We use DNA sequencing to discover drugs in microbes. So things like penicillin, the statins were found in microbes originally. DNA sequencing is revealing many new drugs as more and more genomes get sequenced around the world. And DNA sequencing in general is unlocking a lot of potential in AI, which I think we'll get to. So thank you very much for having me.
Awesome. Welcome, Faisal. Faisal, we will be pronouncing your name correctly by the end of this happy hour.
That's okay, no worries. I'm used to many different pronunciations, and happy hour might introduce new pronunciations. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Faisal Khan. I lead a team of data scientists in the AI and analytics team in AstraZeneca's data science R&D function. My team works on problems throughout the drug development lifecycle, everything from early stage discovery through phase 3 trials and beyond. And that includes target discovery, bioinformatics, genomics, the use of real-world evidence to understand disease journeys, trial design, imaging, many different imaging modalities, digital pathology, retinal imaging, MRI, CT scans, machine learning for trial outcomes predictions, as well as digital wearable devices and remote monitoring. I'm excited to be here and talk with my fellow panelists.
Awesome, welcome. Anna?
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Anna Bauer-Mehren. I'm actually in Munich, so for me it's not happy hour time, it's rather late in the night. But I'm happy to be here and I'm really excited to see the School of Medicine background there, Matthew, because I did my postdoc actually at the Stanford Biomedical Informatics Department with Nigam Shah, so that was a really great time. Yeah, so I envy you a little bit, right? I would like to be there right now. Now I'm actually with Roche, so I'm heading their data science here at the Innovation Center Munich, part of the Pharma Research Early Development, and very similar, Faisal, actually to what you guys do, right? So we also support our teams from early target assessment, all the pipeline up to phase 2 trials, and we apply AI also on all kinds of data types, from the omics, imaging, real-world data. That's actually what I did at Stanford. So my passion is still with real-world data, I would say. And yeah, we have also plenty of examples where AI is really helping us. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Welcome to the happy hour. Maliheh, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
That's perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Poorfarhani. I'm based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So it is the happy hour time here, a Friday afternoon. It's a pleasure to be on this panel. I lead the digital health sourcing and external partnership for Bayer Pharma. So anything from AI and machine learning in therapeutic or diagnostic rare diseases to drug discovery or decentralized clinical trial. I support to bring external partners with respective of the needs of the business. I've been with Bayer for almost 16 years, mostly on the R&D section for design and development of medical devices and software, and now for over almost 4 years supporting the external partnership.
Awesome. Welcome. Dr. Lungren, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Matt Lungren, and I'm clearly, it's always happy hour at Stanford, just in case you can tell from my background. And I'm the co-director of the AI Medicine Imaging Center at Stanford. Run a lab here focusing at least initially on pixel data, but then have branched out into multimodal data and real world data as we've partnered with Nigam and many others that have been mentioned here. So very excited to be here and learn from all of you in the pharma space.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, and welcome. Hopefully, I'm not going to embarrass myself like last time when I forgot one person. I was hoping to forget Matt, but it didn't happen today. And so, really good introductions here. So we know that we're hearing big words, multimodal, omics, actually even devices, right? Which you don't really think of them as pharma. Big companies, startups, successful work here. So, when we say AI in radiology, people say, oh, checks experts, mimic data set, So what are some of the maybe real sort of examples, outside of the organization can people refer to that show, look at this, we did this with AI or something like that, apart from sort of internal processes? I'm not going to pick on anyone, but I actually am notorious for doing that, but I'd love to hear from the panelists some examples that, bring the picture home for some of our viewers today.
So who wants to start? Anna, how about you?
Sure, I can tell you about an example that uses real world data, as I said, right? It's my passion. So I think one thing we have recently also published, actually, so I can really talk about it here as well, is a score that is called RoPro. It's a real world data prognostic score. And what is nice about it is we used actually patient data, so actually data from electronic health records from oncology patients. And then by looking at more than 120,000 of these patients at AI algorithms, we could develop this score. And that's now a prognostic score that we know outperforms prognostic scores that are out there. And what I like particularly about it is there are many applications in clinical trial because we can use it for patient selection, patient monitoring. Also, it's indicative of early signs of efficacy, actually. So it's also being used in dose escalation, for example, to figure out what is the effective dose we're looking into. But it's also really helpful in clinical decision making. And that's, I think, really nice because it can also be really applied by physicians and be used in clinical practice. And for me, why I like it so much is because it really shows, when you bring these really bigger but highly curated data together with the algorithms, then you can really create these tools that you can then use in many different scenarios. And that's why I'm excited about it, because this was not possible, let's say, in the past, where we didn't have access to these larger amounts of real world data. And now with being able to access more of these data sources, it's I think we will see more of them. It's probably just the beginning. But that's one cool example. I have more, but maybe others want to share their most exciting ones first.
It's hard to choose one, as you said, because I fundamentally believe there's no aspect of pharma that's untouched by AI. It's involved in everything. So just because I have to pick one, I'll talk about using simulations in AI to identify new drug structures and doing in silico modeling before you do target lead optimization. But that's all the way at the beginning. I think we're going to hear about other examples in R&D, and I live in R&D. So I'm actually going to pull myself out of my comfort zone a little bit and also talk about the fact that AI is used outside of R&D, right? So in pharma, if you think about operations in manufacturing a drug, or sales and marketing and identifying the right patient populations, or even in support functions like finance and HR. So I live in R&D, and I think that's what we're going to talk most about today. But if I just want to leave folks with the impression that there's virtually no aspect of the pharma industry that AI has not touched.
Yeah, exactly. And following on that thread, for example, especially for oncology-related drugs with very, very short shelf life of 48 hours, and that's 48 hours starting from the time that is off the manufacturing floor to the time that is in patient's body. So we are leveraging a lot of AI to help us with facilitation of the delivery of all of that. And that was a piece that, just like you mentioned, Faisal, is just all over the fields in the pharmaceutical area, from drug to device. For sales, for example, we are using analytical tools to predict the population versus the competitors and the areas with relation to certain diseases and things like that. So I 100% agree.
Yeah, so I can share a specific example. All of the generalizable use cases, I'm completely in line with target identification, biomarker, real-world evidence analysis, image analysis. But one of the things that we built was something that we call Lilly informatics sequence analysis. And we wanted to be able to understand gene targets better. And we wanted to do it in a much more cost-efficient way. So we have a computational scientist in the business that partnered with our AI ML folks in my organization. And it basically takes the input, the target sequence, if you will, and then it go ahead and, figures out how the workflow looks at generating the oligos, predicting the potency, predicting the specificity, and it does it 21 times faster and 136,000 times cheaper. So those are the types of partnerships we do. And the way we've built out our infrastructure, it's a platform of platform approach. And so our scientists will come to us with a business problem, something that they want to solve. And we put together these data scientist teams, and they co-create together, and then we deploy the algorithms for broader use on the platform. In 2020, I think we used the COVID spike protein just as an exemplar to validate what we were looking at. And proprietary, I think there was about 40 to 50 targets that we looked at behind the scenes for Lilly's internal efforts. So that's one specific example. What were you going to say?
Well, I was also going to say the other thing that I've noticed as a really interesting trend is this notion in pharma of a digital therapeutic.
Yep.
So you think about pharma, we're all coming out with molecules, a new drug, a new compound, chemical structure of some kind. That's what people traditionally think about pharma. The cutting edge of pharma is now in a digital therapeutic, a drug, quote unquote, that's purely a digital drug. Goes through the same clinical trial process, will go through the same evidentiary and then reimbursement process, but it might be an app. Just an app that's used to treat or diagnose a disease or intervene, track patients, and can intervene and can lead to healthier outcomes, longer lifespans, or other medical outcomes. So I think that's really exciting. Really, when people talk about digital health, it's a large banner term. A lot of digital health applications fall under what I would call mobile health, which is a great subset. But that purely digital space really excites me. And I think that's where AI is redefining pharma. It's no longer.
But you know what? I think it even goes beyond, right? Because I think it's not only that you will see more of these digital therapeutics, but I think we will even see more of digitally augmented therapeutics, meaning that even with the molecular drugs we develop, there is this appetite for having digital tools and things that go with them. So I think even for the, let's say, traditionally developed drugs, I think we will see this shift as well, right? That you will always have at least some patient engagement, some digital biomarker coming with the drug. Plus, we will see the pure digital therapeutics as well. Fully agree. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's only a matter of time. And I think one of the interesting trends we're seeing is you have to segment your patient population from those who want to be digitally enabled. And then there's a set of them that just prefer the traditional route, right? And depending upon the type of disease and the type of indication that you're working in, you're segmenting your population differently. So it's a wonderful time to be part of our industry, if that makes sense.
So I have a follow-up question on this. We actually saw quite a bit of penalties, right, from companies and in the opioid crisis in terms of direct marketing to physicians to prescribe opioids. And now, as we start to say, now we're bringing this AI machine, and we know it's a super machine, really enabling you to probably, in the past, maybe you needed to buy me lunch and woo me and do all these things. But right now you can buy actually my profile and target me. You know where I live, my cell phone, my prescribing patterns. Let's unpack what are unintended consequences that we see or could happen much as we ride on the optimism.
Well, maybe I start on that part. I mean, there are a lot of data privacy regulations and laws in place, and we normally work with either pseudo-anonymized or anonymized patient data. So it's very, very difficult and not only it's difficult, and also it's because of the Sunshine Act, there are a lot of controls in place to prohibit pharma from exactly doing that.
Yeah, and just to build on that, right, when you work inside the walls of a pharmaceutical company, we have an overall framework for doing the right thing, right? And then embedded into every single organization, there is a set of compliance policies and procedures that you must adhere to. And so any capability that we're thinking of implementation, using, we tend to have legal representation, procurement representation, compliance representation, and we have to go through a whole series of checkpoints, if you will, to make sure that we're not violating any of the laws. So HIPAA, patient privacy, personally identifiable information. Sometimes we're often criticized for moving too slowly, but I think part of the reason we sometimes move slowly is we need to make sure that we're following all those guardrails. Will there be opportunities for bad actors? Of course. I don't think that's specific to our industry. That crosses all industries. But we strive to make sure that we're doing right by the patients, because I think one thing we're really cognizant of is mistakes can be very expensive for the people we're trying to help.
Yeah, and I think that's where we're unique as an industry in many ways. Most of the people in pharma are trying to do the right thing for patients. That's why they got into the field. But there's also, you can never trust anyone to self-police. So there's also a lot of external checks, right? The regulatory environment, the label for a drug, what indication is it approved for? And then further checked by reimbursement and insurance companies. They're not going to reimburse drug usage that's not showing value, that doesn't have impact outcomes. So there are checks, but I think we always have to be diligent for that. And as an industry, collectively, keep an eye on things and do the right thing.
Okay. Maureen, you are successful actually as a startup, entrepreneur. I mean, that's amazing. These are things that we really only dream about. I think we had quite a great story actually about mRNA and the story of the scientist, the female scientist who, developed this. Tell us the perspective of being in a startup. What are the advantages? I mean, what's your story? You get this chance because we are very, very proud and want to learn from you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was also going to chime in on where AI is impacting, although examples I think of are much earlier stage than the exciting things everyone was talking about here. So very much early R&D. I think a lot about AI for drug discovery. So at Hexagon, we're focused on small molecule therapeutics, but obviously AI is affecting early stage in all modalities. So for example, or just a few examples I thought of as people were talking, AI and DNA sequencing. DNA sequencing costs are dropping dramatically, which I'm very excited about. So peak calling for A's, T's, C's, and G's, that's part of the contribution to dropping costs. And that's AI advances in algorithms leading to that. Several mentioned target ID, target identification. That's a big one for me and my company at Hexagon and the whole industry. That's also coming from some of it's coming from large amounts of DNA sequencing data. So for example, in oncology, sequencing tumors, it used to cost $10 million to sequence a patient's tumor, and today it's hundreds of dollars and continuing to drop. So those data sets are starting to be very valuable for AI. And then on the small molecule side, computational chemistry is very exciting and the advances in AI there. So for example, Google's AlphaFold results this year really blew a lot of people's socks off. So I think that's a glimpse into the exciting future of applying AI, not as a replacement, but really a major supplement to drug optimization, target identification and prioritization, and designing these small molecules. So computational people can contribute to identifying the target, building the small molecule, and then advances in synthetic chemistry to actually make the molecule. It used to be, you had to manually think through the steps to, like the organic chemistry steps to make a molecule. Now people are contributing an AI there of, here's the optimal route to make these very complicated molecules that weren't even possible to be made before. So it's like up and down the stack, although the early stage stack compared to the like clinical trials and marketing that we were talking about earlier, but up and down that early stage R&D stack, AI is affecting every single step. So I didn't want to interrupt the exciting conversations before, but that's kind of how I think about, or the first question, where is AI impacting pharma? And then your second question, Judy, on launching a startup. So I already said a little bit about what Hexagon is doing. We are very excited to sequence the whole planet. This is part of our mission, and develop the novel medicines therein. So we can tell from DNA data through some technological advances what's going to be the next penicillin and Taxol and statins, specifically for targeted therapies in oncology and infectious disease. And I learned a lot about startups at Stanford. There's a lot of resources there, obviously, and people who've done it before. So being in that ecosystem helped to make it much easier.
So I have a question. What's it like to work with David Goodell?
Wonderful.
Who's David Goodell?
Yeah, he's amazing. He's chairman of our board, managing partner of the Column Group, one of our main investors. So Hexagon is a venture-backed startup, which probably everyone here knows, but the VC venture capital ecosystem in Silicon Valley. I give some like VC 101 talks at Hexagon to people who don't know about this, but there's this great ecosystem in Silicon Valley and a few other cities of venture capitalists that invest in little companies like Hexagon in the hopes that they grow and become successful and either go public or get acquired by larger companies. So Hexagon's vision is stay independent, grow into an independent drug company for many years to come. We have an engine that can keep churning out drugs. Yeah, so Dave joined our board as chairman, as one of our main investors from the Column Group. he's a legend in the industry, first scientist at Genentech, founder CEO of Telluric, and then the Column Group, this amazing biotech venture capital firm. So yeah, he's wonderful, been a close mentor, advisor to me, and that's also how not just Stanford did I learn from, but people like that who've done it before.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll echo that. You know, as a woman in this field, to have role models and women like you that are truly charting new courses for us, just wonderful.
Dr. Lungren, I got your text. You want to ask a question? You can go ahead now.
Well, I was going to ask a couple of questions, and I didn't want to steal anyone's thunder. I was really just going to, one of the things I'm most curious about is, as I see, Ziad Obermeyer's recent work, which kind of showed that when we base our biomarker decisions and then how we're making therapeutic choices, or whether a drug works or not, we're often looking at the images with a very human-centric view, right? So we're using RESIST, or in this case, the paper, if you're not familiar, was work looking at if we can train a model to map the findings to the patient outcome in terms, in this case, pain, as opposed to the grading system that musculoskeletal radiologists use to determine the degree of severity, right? I mean, if I'm a pharmaceutical company, I'm working on arthritis drugs, just in this use case, wouldn't I rather target the improvement based on this metric rather than a sort of pixel-based only metric? And showing that there may be flaws in that, how are we thinking about, or how are you thinking about what we're using imaging and other biomarkers for in terms of deciding whether a drug is effective or not? And does the machine learning open opportunity to rethink that?
Yeah, I mean, I can just comment. Oh, sorry, someone else.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I can comment. I think this is absolutely the way we're thinking, right? And it's not only imaging, but it's also what was mentioned, digital biomarker. I think one element of digital biomarkers is exactly that, right? Can't we get better, getting even better endpoints to really measure success of the drugs in neuroscience, for example, and other disorders where we are really using still these really old measures, right? Where people have to come in, and then it basically depends all on this one day where they might have just a bad day, right? Or they might have a good day, or basically you don't know. And then using really digital tools like smartphones that you give to them, and then you measure a lot of the data, either via active test or passive monitoring, both can be done. I think that's a huge, at least we do there quite a lot of work. And I think the only, let's say, why we haven't seen maybe so much yet is because, as Faisal said before, right, it's a highly regulated space. So actually to get a new endpoint out there, I mean, you have to really take a lot of time, do many studies, and then of course you can get there. But I think totally going in that direction, using imaging as well. I mean, we have a lot of imaging biomarker work as well ongoing on clinical imaging, but also on digital pathology. So I think we will see that a lot, and I know there is a lot ongoing, but I also know it's a long way to get something really established, right, as a new endpoint, let's say. So I also resist, right? I mean, if we could do that using AI, and there are many people across the world working on that, right? I mean, even just getting that replaced, where it's now a manual thing, that would be already great, but then we all know probably you can get even better. So I think, yes, totally working on that, but yeah. So there's still a lot for us to do. That's good, right? For people doing AI, there's still a lot to do.
I would add imaging means a lot of different things, right? So one would argue the field of pathology is all imaging driven. And if you do work with imaging, for example, non-invasive imaging allows you to detect diseases much earlier, and that's the value. But humans are doing a lot of that work. I think your question is probably around the use of AI in imaging. There's a lot of different benefits that can come from that. One, no AI imaging system is perfect. If anyone tells you that, I'd question it. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing is that AI imaging algorithms, wherever they fail, quantitative methods will fail in the same way. So if you take radiologists or pathologists, the human factor introduces a variability that even the same pathologist will make a different reading on the same image days apart, right? So it's hard to then control for that human error in clinical care. Versus an algorithm, if you always know the algorithm fails in this setting, you can control for that. You can account for that in clinical care. So I think that's one of the benefits of quantitative approaches. The other, particularly in in resource-challenged communities is those experts, the radiologists, the pathologists, might not be available. So how can you provide care at that in that setting? And algorithms or AI-based approaches for imaging can help, and they can perhaps provide. You don't ever want to totally replace a human expert, but they can augment or have a human in the loop system, or just bring in additional firepower in a resource-constrained environment. So I think that's very powerful. So those are some of the advantages of AI-based imaging.
Awesome.
think-
You know,
Go ahead.
yes.
Yeah, the
Go
only
ahead.
thing I wanted to add is you can do the image analysis experiments and then you end up finding that novel digital biomarker. But if you actually want to use it in a clinical trial, you have to figure out how you validate it. So partnering with the regulators to determine whether you include it as a secondary endpoint in your clinical trial and then validate its use for downstream is also part of the equation. And so I think that's part of the challenge that we're facing. And on a case-by-case basis, you tend to handle it with the regulators.
Actually, one of the things that people have talked about a lot is we should do clinical trials for algorithms, right? This is the best audience for this, and it takes forever to do clinical trials. So by the time you are done with the clinical trial, if you were to think about it in terms of digital life cycle, probably your model is no longer relevant. So should we do clinical trials for algorithms? And number two, who should do them? Should it be pharma? Should it be someone else who has the expertise? So I'm curious to hear the participant, sort of the panelists' view on this. Maureen, do you want to go ahead? Go fast.
Yeah, at a little company like Hexagon, for example, we don't have the expertise to do clinical trials yet. We will eventually build that out. So at least for us, the way we think about it is partnering early on, or a lot of companies tend to partner early on in the clinical trials, and then later as they grow and build it out, add that capability internally. But yeah, I think I would defer to other panelists that have a little more experience in this area.
I'll go on.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Andrea.
Yeah, I think the answer is, should we do a clinical trial for the algorithms? The answer is definitely yes, right? Especially if we want to use it at some point in clinical practice, so for whatever the intended use is. Who should do them? I think it depends on who has the expertise. So what we're seeing is there's a small niche contracting capability that's developing in the marketplace as a consequence of this being an unmet need. And there are times when we partner with and aim to understand their point of view as we bring these new algorithms and technologies to market. Second, I think there has been success in the medical device field, and more with some of the AI for radiology, AI for pathology companies, where not only are they getting clinical trial, EMEA, FDA approval, but they're also starting to change some of the reimbursement guidelines. So more and more there are algorithms and tools that are getting approved. And it's still early days because it's a new skill set, and talent, I think, is the critical ingredient. That doesn't matter what type of AI we're doing, talent and what the next generation of technologists, scientists can come together to make this happen is going to be key to success.
I would also add that, we shouldn't think about the clinical trial construct is a very valuable one, and it exists for a reason. We're talking about people's lives. It's a scientific construct for us to make sure that whatever intervention we're considering is going to do the right thing, solve a problem with minimal to no side effects or tolerable side effects. Right? There's no reason why a digital intervention of any kind is any different than a molecule in that regard. So I think it's up to us to maintain that level of rigor, and we should sign up for that level of rigor. But what's interesting is how the use of AI techniques can also just help run clinical trials. You know, for instance, in rare diseases, synthetic control arms. There's a lot of different offerings in the operational aspects of clinical trials, finding the right sites to run a trial and designing a trial. So AI methods and approaches, I think, go hand in hand with clinical trials, but I'd be very wary of anyone who says my digital AI-based approach doesn't need to go through that framework.
Right, and to add to that, the indication for use for those algorithms also plays an integral role to define the limits of that clinical trial, the needs, and things like that. If the algorithm is diagnostic and it's coupled with a certain drug, then definitely, and you have to go through a full clinical trial. If the AI model helps the workflow in the radiology or for triaging, definitely needs to be tested in that environment and follow all the regulatory requirements. But for and it might be classified as a class 1 software as a medical device. But for that particular AI, you don't need to run clinical trial. But it really depends what's the risk to the end user or to the patient, and if it is coupled with a certain drug in the cases that we work with.
Maybe I just also add something that I think is going to be a challenge, right? I think we all know our algorithms, they sometimes need retraining, or you get more data, you know, you don't cover it. So I think this whole concept of model drift and retraining and so on, that's really something that we will have to discuss also with regulatory, because it's not really clear what we do, right, about it. And I think that's just a really interesting time, right? I mean, it's something we all together have to work on, right? Because I think it's important that we retrain if we have then access to better and more data, or replace with a retrained algorithm. Yeah. I'm
really happy you brought that up. Not many people talk about that, right? The regulators are still just talking about your initial model and how do we get AI to be approved by that. But model drift happens. And we as good practitioners have to keep that in mind. So I'm just happy you brought that up.
And data diversity in the training for the algorithm to avoid the bias in the model. That's still is at the beginning, but depending where are the deployment and what are the population that these algorithms are used, that's the integral piece of this puzzle to make the algorithm successful.
Amazing. I'm not going to get derailed by going down the bias road, because then we won't get off this happy hour. But I'm going to actually, so one of the contribution of actually the Stanford AIMI Institute and Dr. Lungren and Dr. Langlot and many other really fantastic people at AIMI is to democratize AI. And this is done by releasing a lot of data sets, and it takes a lot of pain and love to get data sets out. But this has definitely, well, one end it may make people think it's easy to, to build these models, but it really serves as a platform, if adopted by many people, to democratize participation in AI. So what's Pharma and doing, and if you have specific examples, please share them, in terms of developing open science and collaboration, especially in an area where a discovery means IP and a lot of money, and also in an area where you're also relying on open source tools, for example, with the, well, not open source, but things that other people have created or the crowd has created, like AlphaFold, and and seeing that the wisdom of the crowd, you're benefiting from that. How are you giving back to the ecosystem? Because I would want cheaper drug prices, but that may just be my own wishful thinking. But I'm curious to hear about how you're advancing this.
Oh, that's a tough question. I think there is a lot of open data, right? Through all sorts of initiatives, the NIH, the Broad Institute, all sorts of places provide publicly available data, right? And I think what the world tends to lose sight of, organizations like ours, right? We tend to have to purchase that data. So in some ways, even for us to use the publicly available data, there tends to be different license and usage agreements available to us. So that's part of the equation. Now, open science, and are we willing to engage in open science? I think as an industry, not speaking specifically for Lilly, there are pre-competitive capabilities where we tend to join forces together through consortia to make sure that the types of innovations that will enable the reduction in cycle time, the acceleration of therapeutics and meeting disease needs, we've routinely done that for years. And the consortia seem to happen all over the world. I don't know, Anna or Faisal, if you want to add anything along those lines.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a really complicated question. But the idealist in me thinks all data should be accessible, particularly when we're trying to help people's lives, right? But on the flip side, acquiring data, particularly biological data, is a resource intensive, both time, money, effort, right? If I'm in the social media industry, it's really easy to gather web clicks. I set up a little software program and I'll get a lot of web clicks to do AI on. But to gather imaging data, to gather actual tissue samples, biological samples, blood, serum, whatever you may, to store them, or to even just clinical longitudinal data, have a patient come visit a hospital, say every 6 months for 5 years, and have someone take notes on their disease history so you can have that data to build a model. You need people, time, and resource for that, and it's got to come from somewhere, right? So I think that's the trade-off that's challenging, and a lot of nonprofit ventures or government ventures are well suited to helping to facilitate that. You know, in addition to the examples Andrea mentioned, one of the things that's really very heavily the UK Biobank. I think the UK is leaps ahead in many for many reasons. The UK Biobank is a great resource, all sorts of information. So there isn't an easy answer here, and I think we have to work together to figure that out. Two other concepts related to this that I'll just mention real quickly is, okay, you're bringing all this data together. What about data standards? And that's a challenge, right? The joke I always say is there's 10 different data standards. Someone decides, hey, we're going to decide on one. A year later, now there's 11 different data standards. So that always happens. The other thing, and this is a challenge with all data, but particularly I think publicly available data that gets mined a lot, used in a lot of papers, is data goes stale. So clinical practice changes, right? Sequencing technologies change, imaging modalities change. So that's the other thing of, we talked about model drift, but I think a lot of public data sets, 10, 15 years later, the science has moved on. The treatment practices they reflect are no longer clinical best practice. So how do you account for that? And that's another challenge with data that's not refreshed that we have to be aware of. I'm sorry, I don't have good answers. All I'm doing is raising problems.
Yeah, and I mean, I completely hear, you know, how excited the community gets when there is data available. Last year, I helped do some fundraising for a hackathon with the NIH, the HubMap program. And I thought we'd get like 100 participants or 100 teams on that hackathon, right? And there's over 1,000 teams competing for the prize. And I was just blown away because there I am thinking 100 and I get 1,000. You know, I'm thinking there's so much hunger in the community for novel data sets. And, you know, kudos to the NIH. They've already confirmed they'd like to do this on a regular annual basis. This was kidney data, glomeruli, that we released. And amazing organizations came to fund it. Google, Deloitte, Deerfield Healthcare, CAS, because we want to encourage and foster the innovation in the community. So I definitely hear the community when the community says, we'd love to have, you know, relevant, recently generated data sets so we can co-create together and make healthcare better. Completely hear the need.
And to add that, Andrea, we are creating a consortia type of collaboration with chain of hospitals here in US or across the globe based on the product that we are working on for this very specific data sets. That's another complexity. For example, for certain algorithm that has a diagnostic or therapeutic outputs, you may have hundreds of specification for images and electronic medical records that they have to go hand in hand. Like places like UK with National Health Service, that's very easy. They have a central place. Coming in US, this is very difficult. We do not have a central healthcare system. Like matching these information data sets together is extremely difficult, and also finding data sets that matches the specification for that certain algorithm. So we do need to create those consortia with certain hospitals. And another aspect of it is ethical AI and this stigma that is around data and purchasing the data. University hospitals, they don't want to sell the data to a pharmaceutical ones to create a commercial product. So we have to enter into a research collaboration agreement with them. So a lot of complexity around contract type of data and collaboration, and also the ethical aspect of it.
Maureen and Anna, do you have any comments to this question?
Yeah, I was just going to add, just reading the question as it was written on the chat. Data is an important asset. Do you think data should be a public resource available to everyone? Yes, a lot of people feel that way, but when the rubber hits the road, at least on small companies, startups that have investors, you have to deliver, you have to build something valuable. Investors invest, the whole ecosystem runs because they get a chance of making money. So if data is a key piece that adds to that, a lot of companies might not be able to get off the ground if they said we're going to make everything open source. But some of it, yes, and most companies in biotech publish eventually, maybe not right away, but once they get their patents, IP, then they'll publish. And clinical trials are a way of publishing, like the molecule is revealed, the data is revealed. So it's just the earlier things before clinical trials that I think it's sort of a shame that it can't be more open, but I just struggle to think through, at least in some of those cases, how that would work if the data is part of the value that investors are investing in.
Your comment on startup companies reminded me of something. I'm sure that, this is definitely not the case with Hexagon. I've been part of some startup companies that, for various reasons, afterwards went out of business. And then that data is just lost.
Yeah.
Right? So, and that's the other thing. Nonprofits will keep their data. Large companies will keep data around. But I've been part of startups. We went through a lot of effort to get the data. And once it went out of business and people disperse, it just kind of disappears. And that's unfortunate, too. And again, I'm raising problems without any solutions, but just your comment is triggered an observation. I'd never really thought about it.
I think, Faisal, that's a piece because the whole market also is at the budding stage. Pharma is learning, high tech is trying to find their space here, and so we all are learning. So right now we all are at that stage that it's all problems, and it's a good part. It's exciting. We will find solution, but I think that's the piece of it that plays in.
Yeah, and related to that, I think a lot of innovation these days happens in the public sector. So one way around it is massive government funding. Like, what would a cure for Alzheimer's be worth to society? Like, what if we put out $100 billion grand challenge, like a $100 billion prize for a cure for Alzheimer's, and all the data had to be public along the way, like that kind of thing. So government involvement is a way for it to be public, for everything to be open.
Anna, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I can just echo what was already said. I think it's a difficult question, right? And I think there are these consortia that there's usually then all of us on the table. And then usually what happens is that everybody chips in money, right? But the let's say, overall data that is generated, let's say, doing, for example, whole genome sequencing or something, is then shared, and not only shared across the big pharmas, but then shared with the universities involved as well. And I think that's one thing that all of us are doing, and it's a good thing. And the other comment I have is, I mean, what we try to do, especially in informatics, is to use a lot of open source, but also contribute then to these open source projects. So one example is we're currently working on operationalization of AI, which is also a big beast that needs to be solved. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff ongoing in open source. And then by us also working on that and giving our, let's say, requirements in, and we are also shaping this, right? And I think that's something that we can always do. It's very pre-competitive. It really serves all of us. And that's something we are also doing. But it was mentioned why it's also a little bit difficult, right? You can't just always share everything you have at every stage. It's just not that easy.
There are a couple of comments. I don't think there are questions online from Law. Classic RCTs require blinding, which is inherently more difficult with digital intervention. So this places great importance on selected efficacy metrics. So the need for blinded mass readers is critical. We appreciate your comment. I think everyone on the panel says that there is need to maintain the rigor, but we also have to respect and appreciate that the type of trials we run will be different, or even how these technologies, Faisal was really instrumental in giving an example of how these technologies evolve. And so we're coming down to the 7 minutes. I'm gonna try and see if one or two people can say how big of a role will something like AlphaFold play, and then maybe two more questions, and then.
I'm still learning about it, but it seems extremely exciting. It may not replace things anytime soon, but it's already supplementing and giving us a better idea of how to design drugs.
Okay. And so, go ahead.
No, I just want to say very, very beginning and in the learning mode as well.
So I'm going to ask a question. This is for me. Sometimes, development goes on in many places and we forget some other places. In this case, when I think of home, my grandmother actually knew how to treat all these diseases. Find the missionaries may not have thought of it that way, but we know there's a lot of sort of indigenous information about plants and everything like this, right? In in India, I think also many parts of Africa and many parts of Latin America, as we start to have this very portable genomic markers that I can actually ship to my village and start sequencing anything that I can lay my hands on. How does IP and communal ownership happen, and why are we seeing pharma evolve and to bridge the gap that exists and also take advantage of the opportunities in the global health space?
I sense there's 3 questions embedded in there, right?
There can only be one answer because it has to be answered in 2 minutes.
Can you save that one for the next happy hour? I love the idea of the cost of sequencing getting so low that it's not a barrier, right? At today's rate, if I wanted to take like the entire population of the state of Indiana and get them sequenced, right? I can't afford that. So getting it to a point where even, 100,000 of the folks in the state of Indiana could be sequenced would be amazing, right? So that's step 1. That's the cost proposition. Everything else associated with what do you do with the data? What do you do with the information? What do you do with all of this discoveries? I'll speak first as a patient, right? I have arthritis, really, really bad arthritis. It's turning to PSOA. I don't have an effective medicine. If I could donate my DNA, my RNA, whatever the hell, and have a better life, I'd be up for that. Do you know what I mean? I would just honestly be up for that. But that's speaking as a patient. Now, I understand all the other complexities. The patient in me would just love a great drug.
Wow. Are you trying to end the happy hour before 4 minutes are over? Andrea?
Well, I think,
Or I could, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I think, as Andrea said, there were multiple different facets to the question, right? One is new discovery, and where's that discovery coming from?
Yeah.
And how is that recognized? And that's something I think the industry is trying to deal with. The U.S. Patent Office has dealt with some of these issues that have gone through the legal system. So I don't think there is an answer. We're trying to, as an industry, to work through, or as a society, work through all of those questions. But there's the other maybe implied question, which is around not just equitable access to healthcare, but equitable development of healthcare, right? So if you're developing a new drug or new intervention or anything, does that really work for the whole globe? And how best do you do that? You know, some of the most obvious things are clinical trial diversity, diversity of participation in clinical trials, et cetera. But a lot more goes beyond that. I'm sensing a theme of the happy hour. It's just causing me to pose a lot of questions without answers. But I think these are things we're all struggling with.
Okay. Since Faisal thinks this is a bad question and we have 2 more minutes, I didn't
say that.
I want to first of all recognize that the minorities on this call are Faisal and Matt. It's a fantastic panel of women leaders and giants, and we really the last question is really how did you get here? Like, how can people find about you? I mean, obviously, I stalked you all online, but I mean, I just want to take a moment to show respect and just admiration of just having women leaders in really influential positions in big companies and as founders. And yeah, Faisal and Matt, we like you, but you're the minority. I may even give you the final word because of this. So we will have 30 seconds for everyone to say something that they're excited about, or just something, because or even being a woman in this field, or how people can get started. You really do not have to answer my question, and you just have to say something. Andrea, before you kill my happy hour, do you want to go?
I'm excited about playing a role in training the next generation of leaders, women, minorities. And I'm going to plug, we have a bunch of postdoc positions open at Lilly. We'd love to have you come. We're doing amazing work. And if making medicines is at the heart of what you love, please check out our website.
And I'll just put in a plug. Indy may be cold, but it has a fantastic airport. Probably
the great news is we have sites lots of different places, so including one in San Francisco.
Okay. Maliheh?
Sure, I'm really excited to be part of the team that is pioneer at Bayer to influencing our pharma division to bring the latest and greatest drug, especially in oncology area and radiology as well. So really excited about influencing that field.
Anna? Or Maureen?
Yeah. Okay.
I'm excited about meeting people. Yeah, speaking of the global health perspective, I'm excited about meeting people around the world. I think this pandemic, or a silver lining, has been silver lining of Zoom calls has been meeting people in diverse states, countries across the world. And some companies are expanding, with remote work, bringing on people in different countries and around the world. So I think this may open up not just global health on the clinical trials and disease areas, but also global teams, which excites me.
Okay. Anna?
Yeah, I mean, I can just maybe give an advice, right? I would say it's really fantastic times now for people like me who studied, let's say, bioinformatics, data science, like to use AI, like to work with data. And I have a passion to work for things that really help patients in the end, right? Or even go in a preventive setting at some point. That's probably the dream. So I can just recommend, right, if you're really passionate about that, I mean, yeah, try to work in pharma or for government or for whatever. But it's, I think, just a really, really great times to be in digital and in pharma, in my case. And also being a woman doesn't hurt at the moment, or it's in general, it's good to be in this place at the moment.
Faisal, I kind of have to get your name right even one time.
No worries. It's just an exciting time, right? The easy stuff in pharma is done. You can't discover aspirin anymore. So what's interesting is where pharma is going. Pharma will not proceed forward without AI now. AI is a necessary condition now for pharma's advancement, and it's really exciting to play a role in that.
And last but not least, Dr. Lungren.
No, I just think this conversation was terrific, and there's just one of the things that I think was touched on is just the idea that we train lots of students, postdocs, PhD students and masters, and I don't think that pharma is something that was traditionally open to computer scientists, certainly, but data scientists maybe traditionally. And now, what an exciting opportunity, right, to be a part of really any component of basic science all the way to translation and clinical trials. And in combination with some of the impact that you can have in a global scale, I think this is just a big opportunity, and we're glad to see that it's another example of how machine learning is opening some doors and bridges that maybe weren't really open before, and maybe some opportunities to collaborate, hopefully more often on big challenges. And I really hope to see those of you in leadership in the pharmacy and pharmaceutical community to really consider how some of the things in AlphaFold being one of those grand challenges, put the data set out there, see what the community can do. Would love to see more of that happen, and more opportunities to collaborate around those things.
Clearly, Matt doesn't get the 30-second American time. He's on African time like myself. So I'm going to say that we are done with our session today. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm excited to try and get home and get out of my scrubs. And hopefully one of these finders will moderate this not in my scrubs. And thank you so much for our panelists for joining us. And see you next month. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.